Yoram, feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Okay, Boker Tov from Miami. I'm the Vice President in charge of programming at the Jewish Geneaological Society of Greater Miami. It is really my privilege, and I'm really glad to introduce everybody and to acknowledge everybody. I mean, Janice, you are great as an administrator. Etta Gold, I'm sorry that you are still recovering from an eye surgery, but you are really the founder and the force behind our programs. This is today is a program that it's the last program for the season with Temple Beth Am, because the programs are correlated with the School of the Temple. So we should be back probably late in August or early September. But this is really a very special program that we are lucky to have it on the week of Lag BaOmer. So anyway, to start with, I'm really allowed to talk not more than 5 minutes, if not less, on a topic that when I started looking into it, I was told by 3 people that there is not too much to talk about the exodus of the Jews before 1948. When we had the test between us 2 days ago, I found out that 1 hour, 2 hours, 5 hours are not going to be enough to talk about it. You know, we have great speakers here. Besides Professor Green, that I will introduce him in a second, you know, we have Dr. Haim Saadoun and Julius, and both of them wrote books about the topics that is going to be quite amazing. Anyway, whoever is in genealogy a little bit serious, he knows that genealogy can be an addiction. At least it's happened to me also. And once you get hooked to it, then you realize that you are a part of a bigger story. And you also realize how the history repeats itself. So if we take a Lag BaOmer today of this week, it's an example of our fighting even today to keep our nation heritage. Or on a personal level, when there was a COVID now, I just realized how my great-grandparents, they died in 1918 from another epidemic in Palestine, which was called influenza. So when I try to introduce Dr. Edward Green, and I just happened to get up his recent book that he's going to show it again. I just want to prove to everybody that I have it too. You know, then I can tell you one thing, that the testimonies which he is collecting and organizing in video and in this book, it has all to do with our own heritage. The contents already divides the testimonies taken. I mean, it shows the Arab Jews before Israel. It shows the 1948 Exodus. It shows the 1967 Exodus with life testimonies that everyone is talking about how he made a part of the history that we know about it. And this is what fascinated me when I met Dr. Green about probably 8 years ago, in charge on the University of Miami on Judaic Sephardic studies. You know, he is not a Sephardi, and I'm not a Sephardi, but we are all interested about the Jews in Uganda or the Jews in Iraq. And he is definitely devotes all his career into the Sephardic voices. And today he became a brand name, which I told it to him already. It's easier for me as a director of programming to create a forum like today from Jerusalem, from London, when I mention his name. So we are really very, very lucky to have him. I'm not going to repeat his curriculum. You can still hear what I said about him at the previous event that we had in April. It's been recorded and can be played back. And I think that my 5 minutes are up. Dr. Green, the podium is yours.
Yoram, that was very, very kind of you. And I also want to thank Beth Am and Janice and Etta and Paulette, who's the president of the Geneaological Society of Miami. I want to thank for Sephardi Voices. I'm very appreciative that Harif and the Ben Tzvi Institute are part of today's program, and the audience that continually comes out and new people all the time. Because I come out of a classical Jewish education, I think it's always good to begin with a little Devar Torah. And we just celebrated Yom Ha'atzmaut. And what is Yom Ha'atzmaut? It's Independence Day. And what is today's theme? It's Aliya Bet. It's this immigration to Israel before 1948. What we're celebrating is these pioneers who came. And I think of Shemot. And what is the first parsha in Shemot? It's Shemot. And what is it about? It's about census. 600,000 Jews. 600,000 Jews who left Mitzrayim, Egypt, one of these countries, who make up Aliya Bet. And what's the story? The story is that 2,000 years later, we talk about the Ashkenazim. We don't talk about the Sephardi, the Mizrahi, this forgotten exodus, this forgotten participation by Aliya Bet. So I feel extremely privileged that we have two people today, Lynn Julius and Haim Saadoun, who are going to be able to, in different ways, in Lynn's case, more an overview, in Chaim's case, more Maghreb, more the North African experience. And so I just want to say a few things about Sephardi Voices. As you know, Sephardi Voices' mission is to collect the stories in the way that Spielberg did with the Shoah. 52,000 stories he collected, less than 100 of Jews who lived in Arab lands, in North Africa and the Middle East. And so I saw the mission as being able to collect the stories of the Jews who lived in North Africa and the Middle East, roughly with Iran, about 1 million pre-1948. Today, without Iran, we're talking hardly anyone left. Libya, 0. Iraq, maybe, depending on who counts, less than 10, maybe 3. 3, thank you. So, so this is why it's so important, because if not now, when, as they say in Pirkei Avot, if not now, when? And it's our responsibility to collect it so it can become an educational toolkit, so it can be part of the educational system. Why, when we have Yom HaShoah and we have Holocaust survivors, and we have Holocaust survivors come to class, why are we not able to bring Sephardi Mizrahi to come to class on Yom Plitim on November 30th? And so the children can understand, so the grandchild can take pride in his grandparents, and everyone learns and acknowledges that, like today, Aliya Bet is just not a story about the Ashkenazim. It's also a story about the Sephardi and the Mizrahi. So this is what Sephardi Voices' mission is. And if Janice can show my book again, because it just came out last month, I'd appreciate it. It's available in Amazon. In Canada, it's Indigo. Or in America, it's Barnes and Nobles. You can get it in foils. You can get it in Stamansky's. And the goal of what I have with this book is that we're going to, that's okay, Janice, thank you. The goal that we have with this book is to provide every synagogue, every Jewish school, with a free copy, which can be a resource that can be used during the year and especially for Yom Plea team. So let me move on to today's speakers. So we are going to begin with Lynn Julius. And I have to say that, you know, it's not just a moderator here introducing Lynn. Lynn was like a mentor to me. She is, in fact, one of the founders of Sephardi Voices. When I went on sabbatical in 2009, Lynn and I were both involved with JJAC, Just for Jews from Arab Countries. And who did I go see? I saw Lynn. And I said, Lynn, help. And that's what Lynn did. She introduced me to the community. And I'm forever grateful that she lent her hand and made it possible for those voices to expand in all kinds of ways, because it doesn't matter who is doing this. Together, we're stronger. Chazak, chazak, strength to strength. So Lynn is a journalist, a blogger, a speaker. She's the British-born daughter of Iraqi Jewish refugees. Her book, which she'll talk about, Uprooted, How 3,000 Years of Jewish Civilization in the Arab World Vanished Overnight, been translated into Norwegian, Portuguese, and Arabic, I see here. But it's more important that what she does on a day-by-day, monthly basis. She is the founder of an organization called Harif. And during COVID, what she has been able to do is run webinars and has brought people from all over the place. And they have amazing turnouts, and it brings together a network that would not have been possible. So I think we're so fortunate and privileged to have Lynn with us, and I really look forward to what she has to say. Lynn, floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Henry, for that fantastic introduction. Congratulations on publishing your book, and I hope it does well. It deserves to do well. And congratulations on everything you do to record the lost voices of the Sephardim and the Mizrahim.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to show everybody my book, since you mentioned it. It's available on Amazon if anyone's interested. And as Henry mentioned, it has been translated into 3 languages. If anyone's interested in Harif's activities, we have a website. It's www.harif.org. And you're welcome to subscribe to our mailing list. It's free, and we have Zooms every fortnight. And we've got one coming up on Shavuot cuisine on Tuesday. So welcome to join us then. So without further ado, I will share my screen. Just hope you can see this. Okay.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Okay. So the first part of these 2 talks was devoted to illegal immigrants from Europe, mainly Holocaust survivors who tried to run the shipping blockade in the 1940s in order to reach Palestine. What is Aliya Bet? Well, it's short for Aliya Bilti Legalit. And Mossad Aliya Bet was the name given to a section of the Palmach, the elite fighting force of the Haganah, and it was funded by the American Joint, the refugee agency. The Mossad Aliya Bet organized illegal immigration, mainly by sea, in defiance of quotas imposed by the British White Paper of 1939, which, as you know, limited immigration into Palestine. So after Israel was established, this task of immigration would be carried out by the Mossad, Israel's secret service. So with your permission, I've extended the brief a little bit beyond 1948, because after 1948, it was not enough for Israel to open its gates to all those Jews who wanted to come into Israel. The Arab countries decided not to let them out, and therefore clandestine immigration of Jews continued from Arab countries well into the 1980s and may still be going on today, perhaps from countries like Iran and Ethiopia. So I'll just remind everybody that according to a census conducted in Israel in November 1948, 80,000 Jews had arrived from Arab countries in the decades leading up to 1948, and that's just 13% of the total Jewish population in Palestine, which was about 600,000.
Lynn, my apologies. If you have forwarded in your presentation, it has not been advanced.
No, I haven't forwarded yet.
Then my apologies, please continue.
That's all right. Okay. So during World War II, immigrants arrived from Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Turkey, and Yemen in Israel, mostly in small groups or as individuals. Ironically, there were not enough Jews from Europe to fill the quota of legal immigration permits set by the British. Just a minute. Yeah. Yes, I'm okay. It did go forward, Janice. So there were not enough Jews from Europe, but around 4,000 Yemenites came as legal immigrants. In 1944, immigrants also took advantage of unused certificates from the British legation in Baghdad in Iraq, but they had to have forged passports and exit visas, and this was called Method Aleph. But here on this slide, you see the numbers of immigrants from Yemen. Obviously, quite a few, 4,000, over 4,000 of them arrived during World War II. Now, while the war raged, freedom of movement was necessarily limited for Middle East and North African Jews. The Jews of North Africa were either under the pro-Nazi Vichy governments or fascist Italy. But where they could, local communities did try and help refugees fleeing the Nazis. For instance, Hélène Cazès-Benatar, who you see top left, set up a committee in Morocco to help refugees into and out of Morocco. And they mostly went on to the US and Canada. One of the few places open to refugees from Nazism was Shanghai. Egyptian Jews helped refugees en route to Shanghai with money and medical care. And on the right, you see a picture of the Jewish hospital in Alexandria in Egypt, where the staff were instrumental in treating refugees and helping send them on their way to Palestine or to the Far East. After the Nazi-Soviet pact was abrogated in 1940, over 800 Jewish children from Poland, many of them orphans, arrived in Iran from the Soviet Union, the so-called Tehran children. The local Jewish community helped feed and house these children together with the refugee agency, the Joint. In 1943, a group of 716 left Iran and eventually ended up in Palestine, and another group traveled overland from Iraq. And here you see a picture of the children who've arrived in Palestine looking very well settled and well dressed, and obviously getting on with their education. In 1944, it became Zionist policy to encourage immigration from Arab countries, the so-called 1 million plan. As anti-Semitism rose during the 40s, the Farhud massacre in Iraq of 1941, massacres in Libya in 1945, unrest in Egypt, the plight of Jews in Yemen, the predicament of these Jews became more desperate. But while the British were in charge, the only solution into Palestine was to try to run the shipping blockade or employ an overland smuggling route. Zionism in North Africa became very active after the Allied invasion in 1943, but the French, who were in charge there, the Vichy regimes, did not allow legal immigration until 1949. Of course, the Vichy regime fell with the Allied invasion, which began in 1942. But Morocco and Tunisia and Algeria were all still French protectorates, or in the case of Algeria, it was actually part of metropolitan France. So the French did not allow legal immigration until 1949. A local Zionist young underground set up an illegal network with the help of smugglers, both Jewish and non-Jewish. This graph comes from a website called Maghreb.org.il, and I'm indebted to Yoram for sending me the information. Apparently the website was set up by Danny Bitton. It's only in Hebrew, unfortunately, but I understand that he is translating it into English. This picture here shows you the emigrants from North Africa, but it is a bit confusing because there were Ashkenazi refugees heading for Palestine from North Africa, and North African refugees coming from ports in Europe, Italy, France, Greece, Sweden, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia. In 1947, 934 Jews sailed on ships from the Algerian coast. There were 3 ships, the Yehuda Halevi, the Shivat Zion, and the Haporatzim, which I think you can translate as the ones who break through. Correct me if I'm wrong. The Jews passed through a secret camp in Algeria run by the Haganah called Tanas. The majority of migrants, as you can see from this graph, came from Morocco, 19% from Tunisia, and 17% from Algeria. Altogether, some 2,525 North African Jews immigrated to Palestine in this way. And this is a picture of Jews praying at the Tanas transit camp in Algeria. Now, Shmuel Sibon tells his story on the Maghreb website. And he was a teenager from Sefrou in Morocco, and one of the few who was not a member of a Zionist group. He spent a month at Tanas in Algeria. He tells that there was not enough food and the inmates caught lice. He boarded the Yehuda Halevi on the Algerian coast. A voyage which should have taken a few days took 3 weeks. The ship was surrounded by British patrol boats. One holed the Yehuda Halevi and water came rushing in. The ship stopped briefly at Haifa and then was diverted to Cyprus. Sibon spent 9 months there. The inmates in the camp in Cyprus greeted the passengers at the gate, saying, "Where are the Africans?" Thinking that these would be Black African Jews. There were also families on board the illegal ships, for instance, the Shimoni family, who were on the Shifat Zion, and they were a family from Tunisia. The famous Exodus had 50 North Africans on board. And Haaretz wrote an article called Africa on the Exodus about them. So this was obviously a tiny number out of the 4,000 passengers. The person on the right, Shlomo Buskila, was interviewed by Haaretz, and he said there was nothing to eat, and the best thing that happened on the ship was that he met his wife Chava, a Holocaust survivor from Hungary. Libya, well, emigration was only legalized in January 1949. In 1944, the Jewish Brigade fought with the British in North Africa. The Jewish Brigade was made up of Palestinian Jews who were eager to join the Allies and fight Hitler, but it was only in 1944 that they were allowed to do so. But the brigade did much to inspire the Libyan Jewish community to make Aliyah, and 90% eventually did so. Until 1949, however, hundreds of Libyan Jews passed through Italian displaced persons camps.
Oh, my friend.
Hello? Yeah. They were survivors of labor camps such as Jado, which is a horrific camp south of Tripoli, where 600 Jews actually died of starvation or typhus. And there was a massacre in 1945 in Tripoli in which 130 Libyan Jews died. So some 1,300 Libyan Jews made it via Italy to Israel. Many did not have citizenship. Some pretended to have Eastern European citizenship. The International Refugee Organization was unsympathetic and claimed they were not in danger and did not merit to be treated as asylum seekers, but economic migrants. And this actually recalls what Gemma Birnbaum said in the first talk in this series, when she mentioned the UN Relief and Rehabilitation Agency, which treated refugees with skepticism and thought that it was a ploy to get Israel recognized. So in Morocco, after Israel was declared, and of course, emigration did not become legal in the French protectorate of Morocco until 1949. Waves of emigrants headed over the border with Algeria, and they could have been a causal factor in the Oujda and Gerada pogroms of 1948, in which 48 Jews were killed. Until 1956, emigration became legal, and a third of Moroccan Jewry made Aliyah. In 1956, Morocco became independent and introduced a ban. Emigration went underground and was coordinated by the Mizgeret, which was the Mossad, the name given to the Mossad in Morocco. The emigrants left mainly through northern Morocco 3 times a month. At first, Tangier was a key departure point. Here you see a member of the Mossad actually forging papers, forging passports for the illegal immigrants. At first, Tangier was a key departure point. Then the Spanish territories of Ceuta and Melilla became important staging posts, and migrants traveled by boat from one to the other. Here is a map. Tangier is actually at the tip of Morocco there, opposite Ceuta, not very far. Some also used the route through the Rif Mountains, and mostly the Misgeret was able to cooperate with the Spanish authorities. In 1959, though, there was an uprising, and the authorities cancelled permits issued to Spanish taxi drivers to take them across the border into Algeria. Migrants headed for Gibraltar on commercial lines and then boarded Jewish agency ships bound for Israel. The migrants were not told when they would be leaving, only the time and place when a vehicle would pick them up. They were given false papers. The smuggling was timed to coincide with pilgrimages. They sought the cover of crowds visiting saints' tombs or Christian celebrations. The police were bribed at the exit points for Morocco. The migrants ran the risk of being arrested. Some were tortured. Foreigners were expelled. There were some tricky moments. At one stage, a gypsy family encamped on a landing point demanded a bribe for each migrant. Jews continued to leave in secret until the terrible disaster of the Egoz in January 1961. The Egoz, which you see here, was also known as the Pisces. It was about to do its 13th voyage, its 13th illegal crossing to Gibraltar. On board were 10 families. 42 people in all were drowned, including the Spanish machine operator, but the captain saved himself. The tragedy caused a complete rethink. It shocked the Moroccans as much as it shocked the Israelis. And Operation Yachin marked the legalization of immigration, and 80,000 Moroccan Jews left for Israel. And this is a memorial to the Egoz, which we saw in Ashdod on our recent trip to Israel. And a memorial to the Misgeret. Syria. In 1942, Aliya Bet began to send emissaries to Iraq, Syria, Iran, and Lebanon. Rachel Ben-Zvi was the wife of one of the early presidents of Israel, Isaac Ben-Zvi, and she set herself the task of bringing girls from Syria into Palestine. And in 1943, she managed to get 50 girls to come in, and there were 1,000 young people who arrived in all, who were brought to Palestine. About 9,000 Jews, including 1,300 Syrian Jews, were escorted in daring and intricate operations over land to Palestine. So most of these would have been Iraqi Jews taking the route through Syria. Nissim Arkeli gives a graphic description of his attempt to escape using this route. The Arab border smugglers sat us on horses, and instead of saddles, we sat on several sacks. They prodded us to hurry with curses and threats. The road, which wound through mountains and hidden wadis, was difficult and taxing, with the ever-present life-threatening danger of falling from the horses and breaking one's neck on the rocks. Talking was strictly forbidden, and it was impossible to complain or ask for anything. We very quickly developed calluses on our bottoms and thighs. By the second night, the calluses had become very painful, bloody wounds. In November 1947, conditions became critical for Syrian Jews. Riots broke out in Aleppo, resulting in most of the population fleeing. Thousands went from Syria to Lebanon. In fact, Lebanon was the only country to see its Jewish population increase. One such case was the father of Rabbi Abadi, and here you see his story. Sorry, I can't quite see the whole thing myself. Yeah. So my father boarded a train to Lebanon. A train official he knew hid him in the cargo hold, warning that if he sneezed, they'd both be caught and killed. As soon as the train crossed the border, he jumped off the moving train and into a ravine, suffering only minor bruises. He began walking through Lebanese terrain, traveling at night. Eventually, he found his wife and children. They were stunned when he walked through the door. So Rabbi Abadi is today a senior rabbi in the Gulf states in the UAE. Being a refugee from Lebanon, he has now found himself back in an Arabic-speaking country. In November let's start. Just 1 second, sorry. No. No. Sorry, I just call for technical help here.
I'll send you my son.
Yeah, right. I've got a slightly older technical assistant here.
No, what's wrong?
It's not moving.
What have you done?
Okay, right, that's fine. Great, thank you. So Iraq, this is a Zionist youth group in Basra, Iraq. Zionism really experienced a surge in popularity after the Farhud massacre of 1941, in which at least 179 Jews were killed. The first illegal immigrants arrived on their own after the 1941 Farhud, primarily through Jordan, and they followed a route 1,500 kilometers long. Some walked all the way to Palestine. Mossad emissaries found that the shortest and quickest route was along the oil pipeline, and that's the bottom line you see on the map. This route was used between 1946 and 1947. Bedouin smugglers, taxi drivers, even officials of the Royal Jordanian Court would act as guides, but there were military bases along the pipeline, and the Iraqis and the British could both thwart the Aliyah. And there was no Jewish support community in the desert. So migrants were subject to military inspections, and the immigrants could be imprisoned and interrogated. Smugglers charged excessive prices. The haggling went on for months. The Zionist movement was willing to pay 100 dinars or more per immigrant. Several hundred left posing as tourists with forged passports. Then things went wrong. Departures were cancelled at the last moment. Immigrants were abandoned en route, robbed or arrested. And in 1 or 2 cases, migrants were killed in traffic accidents. Avner Shashua was detained when he tried to escape. There were 4 of us. One evening, we were called to leave. Bedouin clothes were prepared for us, abayas, akals, and kafiyas. We got into the waiting car with the driver, smuggler. At one of the curves in the road, the police were waiting for us. The smuggler was in cahoots with the police. We were taken to a detention center into a large hall. We had no beds, no mattresses, and no blankets. We grabbed a corner and sat on the floor. Mossad preferred a route through Syria from Mosul in the north of Iraq to Kamlishi, Aleppo, Damascus, or Beirut. Some better off Iraqi Jews managed to get permission to study in Syria or receive medical care there, but the authorities were increasingly wary of giving it to them. From 1943 to 46, about 5,000 of the 7,500 immigrants from Iraq were smuggled in twos and threes across Israel's northern border. Many returned to Iraq. Emigration was stagnating. By 1947, the Zionist movement in Iraq had 2,000 members, but only 50 had made it to Israel. So we come to Operation Michaelberg in 1947. And here is a picture of the plane which was recently brought into Israel from Argentina, and it's now on permanent display at the Athlete detention camp, which is a museum of illegal immigration. Shlomo Hillel was a 23-year-old Iraqi Jew who had moved to Israel. He was increasingly frustrated until he learnt of two World War II US war veteran pilots with an itch for adventure and empty pockets who'd offered their services. In Palestine, there's some crazy people who are willing to pay a lot of money to smuggle Jews to Palestine, Shlomo recounted in an oral history interview. The name Michaelberg combined the pilot's surnames, I think it was Michael and Sandberg. So they flew this C-46 plane to Baghdad with Hillel aboard. The plan was for 50 immigrants to be transported in 10 cars past an Iraqi military camp on the outskirts of Baghdad airport, and then they would climb through a breach in the airport fence. The plane almost took off without the passengers of the 10th car, but it arrived just in time. In Baghdad, one of the pilots suddenly changed his mind and demanded the money before they left. This is actually not told at the Athlete Museum, this story. Knowing that the pilot had an account with a bank in New York, Hillel lied and wrote him a check drawn on a fake account number. The plan worked perfectly. The plane took off after midnight so they could arrive at daybreak. They landed in a field in the Galilee. A Mossad agent handed the pilots a briefcase full of cash. Hillel retrieved his fake check. The Haganah ran the operation one more time, bringing back 50 more Iraqis before the outbreak of war made the operation too risky. Oops. Sorry. Okay, so this is what you would see if you sat in that plane. The museum has organized a sort of rather nice video telling visitors the story of Operation Michaelberg. It was the first time that civil aircraft were used to transport immigrants. In 1949, Israel made a deal with Alaskan Airways to transport Yemenite Jews from the British colony of Aden at the tip of the Saudi Peninsula. And the Yemenite Jews were in a desperate state. Many had walked, Many had walked through the desert to the Hashad transit camp near Aden to wait for their turn to be transported to Israel. Hundreds died on the way. Here you see the Yemenite Jews on the right. Hundreds died on the way of malnutrition or disease. In the end, 50,000 Jews were airlifted to Israel in 450 50 flights during 1949 to 1950, almost the entire community. And immigration was then banned. Sorry, just go back a bit to this. In 1948, Iraq declared war on Israel and ramped up persecution of its Jews. Illegal immigration using smugglers surged through the south of the country and over the border into Iran. Apparently, about 1,000 Jews were leaving every month. The situation became so embarrassing for the Iraqi government that it decided to allow immigration for 1 year only on condition that Jews relinquished their Iraqi citizenship. The government thought that only 10,000 hotheads and undesirables would want to leave. As it turned out, 120,000 Jews, almost the whole community, registered to go. Shlomo Hillel went back to Iraq to negotiate the airlift, which was secret to begin with. It became known as Operation Babylon or Operation Ezra and Nehemiah. Of course, Hillel could not reveal that he was from Israel. Although short and swarthy, he posed as an English gentleman called Richard Armstrong. At one point, his cover was nearly blown. And the planes were supposedly bound for Cyprus. In reality, they flew on to Israel. So except for a brief interlude at the end of the 1950s and early 1960s, emigration was prohibited for the Jews of Iraq. Moshe Ghattan was the last Jew to leave before the Six-Day War. After 1967 came a very dark period when 9 Jews were executed on trumped-up spying charges in 1969. Ghattan was convinced that had he not been able to be smuggled out of the south of the country, like the thousands of Jews who escaped in 1948, 1949, he would have been the 10th Jew to be hanged. And here he tells his story. This clip lasts 5 minutes.
And there was a woman and a few children as well. And he said, "You wait, we'll get a small boat to..." I waited, and then come the late afternoon, we hired a small boat for a trip on the river, so to speak. We were all on the boat and started going down the river. And the smugglers' boat wasn't there, was not showing up. So we came back again to us. And let's go another round and another round. And the boat was not coming. It was getting dark, cold. And then in the distance, we saw the light flashing of the smuggler's boat. So we told the guy to carry on straight. And then we came, all of a sudden, there was a bit of fog and the boat appeared. We were like side by side. And the boatman saw it and started shouting, "Jews are escaping, help." And from nowhere, we see the patrol boat came with machine gun, searchlights, and it was a split-second decision. What do? Either jump in the other boat, where you may be caught anyway, or stay in this one and you will be caught anyway. So this young boy jumped onto the smuggler's boat. I handed him the children whilst the boat was fast approaching, and jumped to the other boat, and he took off. In the meantime, the smuggler was giving this boatman money to shut up, and he wouldn't. He kept shouting, "Jews are escaping." So the smuggler's boat took off at high speed. And thank God they had a more powerful boat than the police boat. Smuggling is their business, it's not us Jews. They smuggle cigarettes, liquor, merchandise. We were just part of the commodities. And then the shooting started behind us. So the guy said, "You all lie on the floor of the boat," and he put a tarpaulin on top of us. And he started shooting at the patrol boat. So what would have been a 10-minute crossing took in the end 5.5 hours, because he had to get out of the Shuttle Arab. I think we coasted Kuwait to go to the sea and lose them, but not before a lot of bullets were on top of us. And in the end, it got so dark, and he stopped the engine, and we can see the searchlight trying to locate us, and they couldn't. And then they went back. And then we went the full circle back to where we should have been. And it was a terrifying experience, but that's the way it happened. We got to the other side of the border, and got off the boat, and I heard a dog bark. And I heard a man saying, "Shut up, Nasser." At that time, they were anti-Nasser. "Shut up, Nasser." So I said, "Where are we?" He said, "Don't be afraid, you're now in Iran." And then there was a small stream to cross in a little boat as well. And we got on the other side, and there was a car waiting with an Arab in his robe and everything. The minute we arrived, he pulled up the robe, and there were trousers, and he put on a hat, Western hat, a tie and thing. He drove the car. We went through the border control, and I saw something which was very curious. He was giving the Iranian soldiers gold coins. Every time there was a control point, he was giving them gold coins. This was money given to these people because they were helping, because whatever you want to call it. This was money that I didn't pay for, none of the people who were.
Right, so, sorry, it cut off before the end, but he means to say that he didn't pay for this. It was the state of Israel that was paying to save Jews wherever they were in danger. And towards the end of the interview, he says the smuggler ended up being arrested, tortured, and hanged. And the reason why this whole business happened was because the police patrol boat had been changed at the last minute. In other words, those policemen who were bribed were not actually on that boat. And the patrol boat that did challenge the smuggler's boat hadn't been sufficiently bribed. So that was that story.
Lynn,
Yes?
if I can just say that we're approaching 11:30, and I want to give
Yes.
Haim a
I
half
know.
an hour. So
I've nearly finished.
okay.
Sorry, I've nearly finished. I've got one more. Sorry, I've got one more.
There was a woman and a few children.
Shush. Okay, right. So my last slide. So Mossad clandestine operations continued throughout the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. And these are just a few of them. And the people you see on this slide here were all students at the Franchini school in Baghdad, and they would have all left, either smuggled illegally through Kurdistan in 1970, 71, or they might have been lucky to get passports. So on that note, I will leave it and hand back to you, Henry. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lynn. Maybe we could share screen. You could bring us back, Lynn.
Yeah, I will just try and do that. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. They were so interesting, and as Yoram said when we began, each of you could go on for hours and hours in terms of it. But I want to have Haim be able to share with us in the last half hour his story. So let me quickly introduce Haim. Haim is a professor at the Department of History, Philosophy, and Judaic Studies at the Open University, and the director of the Center for Documentation on North African Jewry during World War II at the Ben Tzvi Institute. And so one of the things that Lynn mentioned was that Rachel Ben Tzvi, who was the wife of President Ben Tzvi, was involved in Aliya Bet. And here you have a connection between the president's wife, the institute, and Haim leading the research. He has won the Shaul ben Shimon Prize from Ben Gurion University, the Gaon Prize. But it's more rather than all these accolades of what he does. And I want to just mention one thing. And unfortunately, he invited me to participate, and I had a heart operation. I couldn't. But just 2 weeks ago, April 26th, he had a conference called "To Tell While It Is Still Possible: Oral Testimonies of North African Jewry During the Holocaust." And he has held conferences with the Joint Distribution Committee. He's really taken the educational side of this in terms of his research and has brought it so scholars like myself who knew nothing about this, he's introduced us and so many in various ways. And I just want to mention one of the people who spoke at this conference was Sharon Rappaport, who was one of these early people who, through Lynn and Bea Lefkowitz, brought Sephardi Voices to London. So here's Sharon 15 years later, continuing on, doing research. And here is Haim reaching out and bringing scholars together. And he has been such a luminary for us. So I'm so glad you could be part of us, and I'm looking forward to hear what you have to say. Thank you, Haim.
Thank you very much all. Thank you. Thanks to the organizer for inviting me to this special event this morning in Miami, in afternoon, late afternoon in Israel, about the clandestine immigrations prior to the States of Israel independence. The story and the history of those communities, and this topic especially, was revealed by the Ben Tzvi Institute early in the 1997. Those are two books that we published in the Ben Tzvi Institute in regard to these topics. All the wonderful presentations of Lynn now that she talked about it, it was published with a lot of images and data, very interesting data. And I think that I have about 30 years that I'm working on the subjects, and I didn't publish a lot about the story about the issue, because I was sure, and I will show it later, that there is much more documents at the French archives. And it took me a lot of time to open the archives in France and to have those really fascinating documents that I brought with me today. So please let me just trying to begin with definition, with defining the phenomenon, because this is part of a big issue, and we should sit very, very carefully. In 1948, about 900,000 Jews lived in Islamic countries. 30 years later, yes, we know that only about 100,000 Jews lived in those countries. And during 60, almost all the Jews present in the Muslim world disappeared. And this is most of the interesting phenomena of mass immigrations of the 20th century, as it was described by Professor Della Pergola and other scholars about what's the meaning of immigrations. So I think that there are 6 patterns of immigrations, and what I'm going to talk about it now is only for the first pattern. That means the illegal immigration from 1945, 1940 to 1948-9. But there was also what we call Chisul Geilot, that means the demise of communities, mainly the Iraqi, Libya, and Yemen Jews. And there was the selective immigration, mainly from Morocco and Tunisia, before the independence of those countries. And then there was the clandestine immigration, which Lynn just talked about it, mainly from Morocco and Tunisia, after the independence of those countries. And there was also some sort of immigration of all the other countries after 1967. So the question is, of course, we have today about 30,000 Jews that live mainly in Turkey and Iran. So the question is, who will be the last Jews in Muslim countries? This is a map that I prepared in 1997 that show a little about the topic of the illegal immigration from Muslim countries prior to the independence of Israel. In the green arrow, you can see the immigration from 1940 to 1945, and this was mainly from Libya and the Middle East. In the red arrow, you can see the illegal immigration from 1946 to 1948, and this was mainly from North Africa, I will talk about it, and a little from Asia, from the Middle East. And the red arrow, it's mainly from Morocco in 1949, 1950. I will try to explain, if I will have time, why I choose to finish my work, my research about the topic in March 1949. But if we will see the numbers of illegal immigrants that came in this period from those countries, we are talking about 37,000 Jews that came from those countries. If we see all the statistics that Shaul Avigoud, the head of the Mossad Aliya Bet, talked about it, he talked about 120,000 Jews that came illegally to the states of Israel prior to the establishment of the state of Israel. But it didn't took all the numbers that we know about it today from our research. That means that about a third of all the illegal immigrants that came prior to the establishment of the states of Israel came from Muslim lands. And it's a huge number. It's really a huge number and very, very significant number. So I will talk today, as I promised, only about the illegal immigration from North Africa. And I will try to do it very short and to give the whole picture of this illegal immigration. I think that there were 4 stages in this short period, from 19 to 1945, and then the illegal immigration of 1947 from February to November, and then the special events of November 1907 until July 1948. That means just after the creation of the States of Israel, the establishment, and then what happened from July 1948 to March 1949. In the whole, in my research, it's much more than what Daniel Beaton wrote in his website and his book. It was not 2,500, it was more, it was about 15,000 Jews that came illegally, because most of those Jews left Morocco prior to the creation of the States of Israel. And they were sure that they are going to be, to have ships, to come aboard the ships before the creation of the States of Israel. And they stayed illegally in transit camps in Algeria, in Marseille, after in Cyprus, and etc. But they were willing to come. They left because they wanted to come to the states of Israel. So let me do it very, very quickly and try to describe the main three periods, because the first period, what I call self-initiative, that means the Jews, mainly Zionists, and I have the name of those 11 persons that came illegally to the states, to the what they call the Yeshuv, that means the Jewish settlers in Palestine before the states of Israel. I have all the names. They were all Zionists, mainly from Tunisia. They decided to what we call in Hebrew Hakshama, that means realizations of their Zionist ambitions, of their Zionist desire to come to the states of Israel. And they left all what they had at that time and came to Israel. But the main focus is, of course, those three periods that are very important. So I will begin with the first ship that went directly from Algeria, from the port of Algiers, from Tanas camp to the states, to Haifa. But unfortunately, as Lynn said, they were brought to Cyprus. It was very interesting to understand how it could happen. Why the Mossad Aliya Bet wanted so much that ships will sail from Algerian port to the state of Israel, the early states of Israel, because there were a lot of Holocaust survivors in Europe at that time waiting for Aliyah. There was not really ships for all those immigrants or of Holocaust survivors. There was a lot of problem of budgeting the APALA, the illegal immigration from that period. And the most important is that North Africa is a terra incognita for the Mossad Aliya Bet. What they will do there? What they will do there? They don't know what will be the attitude of the French authorities. They don't know the reactions of the Muslims at that time. They don't know with whom to work, who are the real organizers of the Aliya Bet in North Africa. So why to do it? And this is very interesting question. I worked on these questions, and I think that it was some kind of an attempt to prove to Ernest Bevin, the foreign minister of Great Britain at that time, that Jews want to come not only as Holocaust survivor to the what will be the states of Israel. The Jews over all the world want to come to the states, to the land of Israel. So they decided, and it's not the only reason, they decided to attempt, to make an attempt to see if really the Jews want to leave North Africa. They have no idea about what the Jews really want to do. Are they going really to come to those camps before the sailing in those ships? They have no idea about it. And even the organizers, the emissaries that worked at Algeria during this time, there were most of them, there were three emissaries from Eretz Israel, and all the other were pioneers, Zionist activities from the Tzeiretzion movement, I will talk about it later, that came to Algeria. And it was so surprising that after Passover of 1947, when they launched the idea in the synagogues over all Algeria and Morocco, that there is a possibility that a ship will go from Algeria to the land of Israel, that people just left their houses, youngs, families, and came to Algeria. First it was 100, 200, 500, 700, 1,000, and it was more than what they thought that they can be on the ship. And they called the Mossad Aliya Bet in Marseille and said, okay, we have more than thousands immigrants now at Tanas camps. It's 170 kilometers west from the capital of Algeria, of Algiers. what to do with them. And they sent Yehuda Halevi. This was the first ship that came from Algeria directly to Haifa. And the mistakes that the organizer made at that time is that they did not coordinate the sailing of the ship with the French authorities. They did not coordinate with the French authorities. That means that when the police saw that there is a ship in the harbor of the small harbor of Tanas, they thought they are smugglers. It was a very critical period in Algeria in 1947. It is what the French call at that time, or the Algerian call le statut d'Alger. That means the new law about Algeria and how they are going to handle the new regime in Algeria after the creation of the United Nations, the idea of the decolonization. So it was a very crucial time for the French. And they were sure that this is someone that is bringing arms to the Muslims in Algeria. Sorry. So they stopped the immigrations of this ship, and the ship went with about 400 Jews aboard the ship to Haifa, and from them to Cyprus. The second was, as Lynn mentioned, was Shivat Zion. Shivat Zion, contrary to what I said, was coordinated with the French authorities. But it took also only 400 Jews. And what about all the others? Now, in July 1947, there was more than 2,000 Jews, most of them from Morocco, in Algeria. So the Mossad Aliya Bet sent another ship. It's called the Chalutz, Geula. There is a lot of names because it was not succeeded, and it took only 40 Jews aboard. And this is what it was the only ships that really arrived to Israel, and the immigrants were not transferred to Cyprus. So the Mossad decided to stop this way of illegal immigration directly with ships from Algeria to Haifa, because there was also the pressures of the British foreign minister that was aware now that there is shipments also from Algeria to Haifa. So they decided to stop it, but I want just give a focus to some characteristic of this period. As I said, it was a direct sailing from Algeria to Haifa. Most of the Jews were sent to Cyprus. Most of the Jews came from Morocco, and it's very interesting to try to understand. Then the organizer were 3 emissaries from Eretz Israel and the local Zionist activities. And this was the first encounter of the North African Jews, which was, I call the other Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, mainly in Cyprus. It was not before. But there is a very important factor. This is the politicizations of the clandestine immigrations. I have a slide on this. I will talk about it. But what about the Jewish community leaders? What they know about it? Did they really accept to these illegal immigrations? What will be the meaning for all the communities? I can say that they didn't know about it. They did not share the emissary did not share the idea with the community leader. Here are some documents that I found recently in the French archives. After the failure of Yehuda Halevi, the police took all the immigrants and detailed the names. We are talking about genealogy. Okay, so we have now the name of all those Jews that were left in Algeria after the sailing of Yehuda Halevi. Yes, and we have also the places, Hachshara headquarters, that means where they were put. And we have a list, we have also details about where they came from, we have details about the families and about the occupations of those Jews. And we have also photos, very interesting photos of those Jews from of those clandestine immigrants, the Ochayun family, the Ben Daoud, and you have also reports of the French authorities about this operation. They really didn't understood what will happen to those Jews. And all the Jews had to fulfill a special form that asking a permission to stay, what they call séjour in Algeria, but they were all refused by the French authorities. So they stayed after the first shipment, after Yehuda Halevi, they stayed illegally in Algeria. And the question is what to do with them, where to put them. They closed the Tanas camps. As I said, it was far from Algeria. And from the testimonies that we have, this is most of them oral testimonies, Jews were at the street in the town, in the capital of Algeria, in Algiers. They were at schools, Jewish schools. Yes, there was no really places for those Jews. Each of them has a special place on the streets in Algiers with all his family, waiting to the second ship that will come from Marseille to Algiers. It was a very, very complicated situation to those organizers, to the local Zionist activities. What to do with the time with them? What to do with the children? We know the children died in those camps. I don't know the exact number. I know about the name of 3 children that 2 of them died in Algeria, one on one of the ships, on the Exodus ships that was mentioned by Lynn. But what to do really with those children? So they have a special camps, and it's very curious in history. You know that history likes ironies. The camp was at a place that's called Sidi Ferouche, a small port town near to Algiers, about 17 kilometers from Algiers. And Sidi Ferouche was the place in which the first French Navy in 1830 conquered Algeria. And this was the same port from which the Jews began to leave North Africa. That means that the special attachment between the French and the Jews, sometimes with the irony of history, it's getting very curious. So I talked about the politicizations of clandestine immigration. So there was 2 main Zionist movement in North Africa, very active during this time. The first one was Tzeiret Zion, that the basis was in Tunis. They came to Algeria to work with the shlichim, with the emissaries from Eretz Israel on the questions of illegal immigration. And they were sure that they have to do it because they promised to those who will participate in this movement of Tzeiret Zion that the only goal, the only task of being part of this movement is the fulfillment. That means to make Aliyah to Eretz Israel as soon as possible, and not 2 years later than the time that you join the movement. And they were obliged to learn Hebrew. They were obliged to go to special achshara, that means special preparement to work in agriculture in Israel, to know songs in Hebrew. So when they saw that there was no certificates for Jews to come to Israel because of the situation of the Jewish people after the Holocaust, they tried to find a new solution. Illegal immigrant was a good solution from them. But they were not the only who really took place at North Africa at that time. There was also the revisionist movement, Lehi and Beitar, that were very active in North Africa. And the first shipment of Jews from North Africa to the illegal immigration ships were in the Ben Hecht ships. That was a revisionist ship that were from Marseille to the land of Israel in February 1947. That means 3 months before Yehuda Halevi. And the emissaries from the organizer from the Tzeiret Zion movement are writing to Shaul Avigur, the head of the Mossad Aliya Bet, if you will not send a ship now, right now, the revisionists will lead the questions of illegal immigration of North Africa. You don't want it in Europe, you don't want it also here in Israel. That's why he sent Yanni Avidov, that was one of his biggest, I think, friends at that time, that was very known in Aliya Bet in Europe and in Iraq and other places. And he said, he was a Mapai member, he said, go and see what is the situation there. And Yanni Avidov, with Ephraim Ben Chaim, with all the worked on the issue of the illegal immigrations. So the situation, and here I'm coming to the third stage in this period. In November 1947, there was a new situation. No more boats, no more ships from Algeria directly to the land of Israel. So the Mossad began to send the Jews by plane and by boat to Marseille, and from Marseille or from other ports in Italy to in the illegal ships to the land of Israel. And we have then a number of about 700 Jews that were on those boats. Most of them were on 2 or 3 boats, even on the Exodus, and Zlin really mentioned. They were very active on the Exodus. It's a very, very fascinating story to see those young Jews from Algeria and Morocco, how they were active on the Exodus. But this was also another encounter between Jews and Holocaust survivors for the first time, but it was on the ship. Not in Cyprus. Not in Cyprus, it was on the ships. And we have evidence from the captains of the boats about problems that were between the North African, what's really called the Africans. Yes, they wanted to see the African, between those Africans and between those Holocaust survivors. But it was not enough. It was not enough. Because hundreds and thousands of Jews were now in Algeria. The most they heard about the possibilities to leave Algeria to the land of Israel, they left Morocco, mainly after the riots of Ujda, that also mentioned by Liv, from Ujda in June 1948. The letter that we have from the emissaries that were there, they called about some I'm not sure that I'm saying it in English exactly, a psychos of running out from Morocco. And there was hundreds and thousands of Jews that came to Marseille, to Algiers, and from Algiers they went to Marseille. And all of them came before the creation of the States of Israel. Only in March 1947, only in March 1949, sorry, 1949, the Jewish agency, his representative was Jacques Gershoni, and the Résidence Générale of Morocco, Le Marshal Alphonse Joan, arrived to an agreement that was to control the illegal immigration from Morocco to Algeria. And that was, from the one hand, the end of the illegal immigrations from North Africa, but on the other hand, yes, it was the beginning of what we call the selective immigrants, yes, the criteria of selective immigrants from Morocco that were later in 1952 to 1956. So do I have 2 more minutes, Henry?
Yes, you have 2 more minutes. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So I tried to write here some explanations about why the Jews leave Muslim lands, mainly the question of North Africa. I think that the most important reason is the political situations. That means the decolonization process that was after the creation of the United Nations, and riots that were here and there in those countries. Some of them were mentioned by Lynn, but they had an important impact on the Jews. the economic potential of immigration. That means to improve their situations in the land of Israel, and the degree of modernizations if they will stay, yes, in those countries after the independence. So all of this, I think, we came together to a special period in which there was a special and critical situations in North Africa. Here I try to put just a few words that were in North Africa and in all Muslim countries, that's been in Algeria and in Morocco, in Oujda in 1948. And I tried to have some very interesting photos, not this one, but this is the only photo that we have from the Farhud, from Oujda in 1948. This is the burial of the bodies, the digging of the graves. And this is what we have from Zawiya in Libya in 1945, the graves of Moshe Kish, and the cemetery of Libya with the graves of the Tripoli. So what was the impact, and I'm concluding, what was the impact of this clandestine immigration from North Africa? First, I want to talk about data. It was a great number. It was 5% of the Jews in North Africa. About the way of immigration that influenced the way of immigration later. Lynn talked about it, how the Mossad did it after the independence of Morocco, and the motives. And something that was new for the Jews at that time, that's mean the Haganah, how to protect the Jews. The questions of protecting the Jews and illegal immigration came together at that time. And it was together when they talked, when the Misgeret was created at 1956 in Morocco and other places. And the first encounter between Ashkenazi Jews and North African Jews were not in the land of Israel after the creation of the state of Israel, was not at the what we call the mass migrations of the Jews from North Africa. It was much more earlier, in 1947, beginning of 1948. But also we have questions about the response of the Jewish leader communities, what they're thinking about this process, because this was the beginning of the process of the end of the Jewish communities in those countries. What they're thinking, how they respond to those waves, to those new trends now. So I think that the clandestine immigrations from North Africa is really a fascinating topic. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about and to describe it very, very shortly. I can talk about it hours and hours, but this is not the time. Thank you very much all.
Okay, if you can return me to the screen. I just go view here, gallery. This was just amazing, Haim, just amazing. And kol hakavod. We're not really, I don't know how much time we have, but I want to just sort of summarize this for you in some kind of way. What Lynn did was she provided a kind of macro view. But what Haim did was he went and did a micro analysis by focusing just on the Maghreb, just on North Africa. And in the process of doing that, I want to go back to how I began my introduction about Yom HaTzmaut and Shemot and census. And what he did is he went and looked at census, if I could put it in that context. He went into the archives, and the archives is not just for people like me who are scholars and Lynn, it's also for people like Yoram and Paulette who do genealogy. He has names of people, which you now can mine in all kinds of different ways. He also addressed at the end, but it was part of his whole analysis, that if you want to understand Yom HaTzmaut and Israel, you have to understand how the Ashkenazi basically did not reach out to the Sephardi. He talks about it as a first encounter. Secondly, in terms of Jewish leaders and institutionalization,